technical terms often sound self-explanatory and aren't. It sounds as though from the name of the term you can figure out what it means. I think there are a lot of people out there who think that they really understand what the theory of relativity says, namely that everything is relative. They just don't know the mathematics. And of course that's not what the theory of relativity says. Similarly, market failure does not describe all ways that a market could fail, nor, more important, is it mostly about markets. It is a problem that exists in a great many contexts, including markets. And what I'm going to try to explain is what I think market failure is, why it is a legitimate argument against laissez-faire, but I want to claim a stronger argument for laissez-faire because it is a stronger argument against the actual alternatives to laissez-faire. It's a problem which is the exception in the private market and the rule in the political market. What is it? I think the right way of thinking of market failure is that it describes situations where individual rationality does not produce group rationality. And my favorite example is military. You can imagine that you're one of a line of 10,000 men with spears, and they're all pointing that way, because coming at you are another 10,000 men on horseback, and they have spears too. And you do a very quick cost-benefit calculation, and you say, if all of us stand and keep our spears planted, with luck we can break their charge, and some of us will die, but many of us will live. If we run, horses run faster than we do. I should stand. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I said we. I don't control him and him, I only control me. The relevant question is not should we run, but should I run? Well, if everybody else stands and I run, one person out of 10,000 is not going to have much effect on whether or not they stop the charge, and I won't be one of the ones who's killed doing it. If everybody else is going to run, my only chance is to run faster. Whatever everybody else is doing, it is in my interest to run. All of us follow that logic. All of us run and most of us die. Welcome to the dark side of rationality. But that's a nice example, I think, of a pattern that exists in lots and lots of other contexts, where each person acts in his own interest, but his action benefits him but imposes costs on the other people. Theirs similarly, and therefore the net effect of his action is negative, even though the effect on him of his action is positive. And there are lots of examples. For a less exotic one that you have probably experienced yourself, indeed, some of you may have experienced it within the last 20 minutes or so, a different version of it. You're in a restaurant talking with your friends. And the only problem is that the other people in the restaurant are talking to their friends, and that makes it a little harder for your friends to hear you. So naturally you respond by speaking louder. And of course the other people in the restaurant, when you're speaking louder, also have to speak louder in order that they can be heard. And then you have to speak still louder. And so you end up with everybody yelling and nobody can be heard. And again, that's the same pattern of market failure, where each person correctly believes that his raising his voice will better achieve his objective, but all of us raising our voices results in all of us worse achieving our objectives. So those are all examples of the same pattern, and one can offer lots of others. Why is it politically interesting? There is a simple argument for freedom, and the simple argument for freedom is that each person knows his own interest, each person acts in his own interest, and therefore the sum of our actions is in all of our interest. And unfortunately that's not a correct argument, although it's a sort of simple, persuasive one. But that argument seems to imply there's no need for government to interfere or to change what we do. And what's wrong, is should be clear by this time, is that there are some contexts where I get the benefit of my action and you bear the cost. Air pollution, for example, where my steel mill produces steel but also produces sulfur dioxide, and that's a cost for the people downwind, but I don't live downwind of my factory, being a sensible person. And therefore the costs that go into the price I sell my steel for don't include the cost of the air pollution. And the result may be that some people use the steel even though it's worth less to them than the total cost of producing it, including the effect of the air pollution. And you can think of other examples of the same sort. these are what we call negative externalities. There are cases the other way around, positive externalities, where I pay the cost and you get the benefit. A radio broadcast, for example. The term public good is used by economists to mean a good where the producer can't control who gets it, and therefore can't charge for it. And therefore, if something such a radio broadcast is a public good, its value to the listeners is greater than the cost of putting it on, but the producer can't capture that value, therefore it doesn't get put on, and that's, again, a failure of individual rationality to produce group rationality. And that suggests, now some of these problems can be solved on the private market by sufficiently ingenious individuals. For example, there are a bunch of externalities which are internalized in a shopping mall. That if any one store provided free parking, most of the benefit would go to the other stores. But the owner of the mall can provide free parking and then charge all of the stores in the mall in the rent that they have to pay for the benefit that that free parking provides. He can even do more detailed coordination. The owner of the mall may realize that it would be that a late night restaurant would be better off if it was next to a movie theater, and a movie theater would be better off if it was next to a late night restaurant, and therefore arrange to rent the space in his mall accordingly. So some problems that look like market failure problems can in fact be fixed. It may have occurred to you that in fact there are private radio broadcasts, even though there obviously can't be because you can't pay for them because you can't control who gets them. And the answer is that some unknown genius thought of the idea of producing not one public good but two, one of them with a positive value to the consumers and a positive cost of production, and one with a possibly negative value to the consumers but a negative cost of production. The second, of course, is the advertisement. It has a negative cost of production from the standpoint of the radio station because companies will pay it to put on their ads. Tie the two tightly together and give away the bundle. And that, in fact, is the main way that private radio is funded. But if you think of the logic of it, we have no reason to believe that all examples of market failure on the private market will be solved in that kind of way. What you need for a decentralized system to work is to somehow have individual interest correspond to group interest. And the private market comes surprisingly close to doing that through the price system. That basically, if I want to use inputs for my production, I've got to pay the person who's got them enough so he's no worse off with my using them, which means that the cost to him of working for me, for example, is transferred to me in the price I have to pay him. Similarly for all my other inputs, my output, the value of my output is transferred to me when I sell it to the ultimate consumer. So the private market, to sort of first approximation, solves all of this, makes individual rationality lead to group rationality, but then there are exceptions of the sort that I've described where you can't make that work. And that is, I would say, the main reason that most economists are not libertarians, let alone anarcho-capitalists, because they say to themselves, look, we could solve these problems by having the government step in and have regulation of air pollution. It can subsidize basic research, can do various things in order to solve these problems, and that's their basic argument. And that is why why there is a legitimate argument against our position, as it were. The problem with that argument, however, is that it assumes that the government will do the right things. There is a very real sense in which there is no such thing as the government. That is, there is no person standing up there benevolently looking at the society and saying, how can I fix things? What we call government action is the outcome of another market, a political market on which, just like the private market, individuals are acting in their own rational self-interest and interacting in various ways, and that produces results. So for the political market, we can ask exactly the same question as the private market. Is it a situation where individuals bear the cost of their action, receive the benefit of their action, and therefore where the individual interest is equal to the group interest? And if you think it through, you realize that it is not. That in fact, the political market is much farther from an efficient decentralized system than the private market. We can start with you. The individual voter, the sort of basic, simple theory of democracy is that the politicians will do the right things because if they don't, we'll vote them out. In order for that to happen, the voters have to know whether the politicians are doing the right thing. For some reason, politicians practically never campaign with the slogan, "I'm the bad guy." As far as I know, nobody has ever introduced to the US Congress a bill entitled "A Bill to Make Farmers Richer and City Folks Poorer." We have such a bill every year. It's called the Farm Bill or the Agriculture Bill. But that's not how it's labeled. It's labeled with an explanation of why it's in everybody's interest for food to be more expensive, which is what it mainly is trying to do. So therefore, that means that the individual voter, in order for the system to work, would have to invest sizable amounts of time and effort in trying to figure out what the politicians who he's voting over have been doing and whether those things were good or bad. What is his return from doing that? The answer is essentially zero. First, in a large polity like the US or the UK, his vote is unlikely to affect any outcome. And if it does affect an outcome, and if it does result in a better politician getting elected, the benefit of that is shared with everybody else in the polity. So therefore, rational voting would be producing a public good, which is 99.9999% public and only 0.00001 or so percent private. Therefore, the result is, of course, you don't get it, that voters are rationally ignorant. Rationally, because it is rational to be ignorant when the information costs more than it's worth to you. And that gets the kind of political system that we actually have. Most recently demonstrated in the US, but I'm sure the UK has got its own demonstrations of the same principle. So that means that market failure, which is the exception on the private market, is the rule on the public market. Consequently, shifting a decision from the private market to the public market is more likely to create market failure than to solve it. And you can think of lots of other examples that, for example, politicians often claim that the reason the government has to decide things is because people are too short-sighted. But if you think about it, what you need in order to bear costs now for future benefits is secure property rights. You have to be sure that you who bore the costs will get the benefits. My standard example is planting black walnut trees. Black walnuts is a very pretty wood, very pretty lumber, but it's a slow-growing tree. And suppose it takes 30 years. And if I plant a plantation of black walnut trees, I will be at least 10 years dead by the time they are harvested. So it sounds as though I should never do it. But in fact, I could do it. I could do it in my rational self-interest. Because 10 years from now, when I'm only 90, I could sell that plantation to somebody else who is willing to wait 20 years to harvest it for a price representing the fact that I've done the first 10 years. Politicians generally have very insecure property rights in their political assets. So that, as I put it some time back, Clinton could rent out the White House, but he couldn't sell it. And if a politician, say an urban politician, takes money which he could be using to buy votes and instead uses it to repair the city water system so that it won't break down in 15 years, he's not the one who would suffer if it broke down in 15 years, because by that time he's going to be out of office. And I'm thinking of an actual Brazilian example which I came across. So that's one example, but there are lots of others. A judge in our system sets precedents. If the judge sets a precedent that's just a little bit off, that reduces the income of the society by 1/10,000th, that's an enormous amount of damage for a single human being to have done, but he'll never even notice, let alone having to pay for it himself Again, I'm thinking of a real example of a particular judicial decision in the US that a smart high school student should have been ashamed of making, because it depended on comparing a annual cost to a lifetime cost and saying, well, they're about equal, so therefore the person who was bearing these costs should have been informed about both of them in order to make sure he could make the right decision. Anyway, that would be a... Politicians pretend to be interested in the future, because the nice thing about future benefits is that nobody knows if they're real. So therefore you can claim that the champion of this approach, I think, was Joseph Stalin. That Stalin could not tell his contemporaries living in Moscow, who were living a family to a room, that you have it well off. But he could tell them, you indeed are suffering, you are making sacrifices, so that your children will be richer than the Americans. He couldn't do that forever, but he could do it for a fair while. So I think there's actually something in Lewis Carroll about pie or something yesterday and pie tomorrow, but never pie today. So anyway, you can think of lots of other examples, and you've probably heard enough, so I shouldn't go through them. So let me go on instead to talk about forms of market failure that are not political, because there are a whole bunch of... Market failure comes up as a political slogan, but in fact it is a very general issue. And let me give you some examples. For example, how to win a battle. And the answer is that when you want to win a battle is to set things up so that your enemy's soldiers can run away. All right, it's true you'd kill more of them if you blocked it, but if you block them from running away, they may not run away, and then you may have to actually fight them and get a lot of people killed. One of the solutions for your own army is actually proverbial, and that's burning the bridges behind you. That if you are willing to take a high risk in order to win a battle, you march your army across it, you face the enemy army, and you have some engineers destroy the bridge behind you, and you point out to your soldiers there's nowhere to run to, so they'd better fight. That's a risky tactic, but it might work. Another way of doing it is to somehow arrange things so the individual soldier cares a great deal about the soldiers to his right and left, and very much does not want to do things that will get them killed. And my standard example of that is the Sacred Band of Thebes, which was supposedly a military unit made up of pairs of homosexual lovers, no one of whom would ever show cowardice in the presence of his beloved. And if you believe the story, which is probably an exaggeration, they win every battle they fight until the last, when they encounter an army commanded by Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander, and die to a man. So that shows up in one of Mary Renault's historical novels, which an author I'm fond of. But one final example from my profession, teaching, is I'm giving a lecture in economics, and I tell my students, all right, I've just explained the principle of comparative advantage, one of Ricardo's great inventions. Did everybody understand it? And nobody says anything. And I only discover my mistake when I grade the final. And I have a solution to this problem, because part of the fun is, can you engineer around market failure? And the solution, I'm only a theorist, so I haven't actually done it. But the solution is you have a classroom where at every place there's a button on the floor that a student can unobtrusively push with his toe. And when I come to the relevant point, and there's a sign at there's a panel at the back of the classroom which shows how many buttons are pushed. So I say, will everybody who clearly understood the principle of comparative advantage please push your button? And the number 2 appears on the sign, and I go back and do it again. Let me find, well, market failure is also a profit opportunity, because the existence of market failure means there's some way that things could change would produce net benefits. So if you can only figure out how to make that change happen, you might be able to pocket some of the net benefits, and you can think about those yourself. Let me end with my favorite story about engineering around market failure, and that is that 2 Bedouins are riding their camels through the desert, And one of them starts complaining about how slow his camel is. This snail disguised as a camel. It's going to take me hours to get to the oasis, although it's only a couple of miles away. And the other Bedouin says, you think your camel is slow? This rock I'm sitting on is never going to get to the oasis at all. So they get into an argument about whose camel is slower. And they finally agree to settle it with a bet. That whichever Bedouin's camel gets to the oasis last wins the bet. 2 dinar, golden coins. Well, you can see what happens. That one of them goes slowly and the other one goes more slowly because he wants to win the bet. And an hour later, there are 2 Bedouins sitting there, camels stock still in the blazing sun with the oasis still a mile away. And at this point, a wise man comes by walking, and he says, why are you 2 idiots sitting here, camels stock still in the blazing sun with the oasis a mile away? And they get off their camels in order to explain the problem. And he whispers 2 words to them, and they jump on the camels and ride off for the oasis as fast as possible.
Swap camels.
Swap camels. All right. So that's a entertaining example of how one could sometimes engineer around market failure. So the concept of market failure is not only relevant to political arguments, it's also relevant to making sense of the world, for making decisions, for seeing when things will or won't work. And if this was a longer talk, I'd give you several more examples, both of market failure on the political market, of which probably you would think of your own, and of ways in which market failure is relevant to life, to running households, and so forth. But my webpage is daviddfriedman.com. You can find many things on it, including videos of many talks I've given, including longer versions of this talk, which has some of that. Furthermore, it has links to PDFs of most of my books, which you can read for free. It has links to all of my Substack posts, of which there are now, I think, a couple of hundred, sorted by topic, a bunch of different interesting topics. In general, I believe in giving information away because my objective is mainly to produce information in order to spread ideas, not mainly as a source of income. So I think that's the amount of time I was supposed to talk for. And